There are two words that will strike fear into any Formula One driver in 2021. Track limits. Track limit breaches, which have arguably cost Max Verstappen a victory, fastest lap, and pole position already this season, might feel like a new problem for Formula One this year, but it has been part of the rules since the formation of circuit racing. The rule has always been, stay within the track boundaries or face the consequences. But the issue has become magnified recently by a few factors. The increased use of tarmac over gravel or grass runoffs for safety purposes, the improvement in technology to detect and police track limits, and the ever-closing margins in performance. When a couple of thousandths of a second can be the difference in securing pole position or taking the fastest lap bonus point, grabbing those few extra centimetres can have a major impact. But gaining any advantage has to abide by the rules, which is why track limits continue to be such a hot topic, and why doing away with them isn't an option. The matter has become such a headache for Formula One that it was a key discussion point during the Spanish Grand Prix weekend in a meeting between the team principals and series chief Stefano Domenicali, leading to added pressure on the FIA's own long-running track limits working group. Yes, there's a group for this, which works on the solutions to suit all motorsport categories, including MotoGP, through input from the FIM. Red Bull's motorsport advisor, Dr. Helmut Marko, like many others, have pleaded for a more natural deterrent for exceeding track limits. Things like bigger curbs, gravel, or grass, which continually gets considered and applied wherever possible. But safety is often the reasons that these aren't applicable. Gravel has less grip than asphalt, so a driver cannot slow down their car as effectively on it when travelling towards a barrier at over 300 km an hour. Gravel also increases the risk of the car or bike digging in and flipping, putting the driver or rider at greater risk of injury. Stones can also get dragged onto the circuit, causing punctures. The traps require a lot of maintenance, which can interrupt sessions and takes time and money, and that cost is multiplied over however many days a year a circuit is in operation, not just the 3 days of a Formula One race weekend. And for many circuits, in order to be profitable and sustainable, the highest safety standards must be upheld for both car and bike racing, which means runoffs and track limits must cater for both. Track days are also a major source of funds for circuits outside of a race weekend, and amateur drivers would rather not damage their vehicles in a gravel trap. But that's not to say bike racing has had it any easier this year with track limits, as Maverick Vinales also found out in Portugal 2 weeks before Verstappen's heartache, when he lost 2 of his fastest laps in qualifying for fractionally dipping his tyres off a curb, leaving him to drop from a front row start down to 12th. And even at car-only circuits like Monaco, where the Armco barriers are essential to safety, multiple drivers were still falling foul of the same old frustration. At the Nouvelle Chicane, where there's a tiny runoff to stop drivers hurtling nose first into the walls at high speed, drivers were continually running off the track and duly picking up warnings from the FIA. It almost cost Lando Norris his podium finish, having used up his 2 track limit allowances at that corner by lap 7, and had his race engineer Will Joseph with slightly sweaty palms. While the simple solution would appear to be some kind of barrier to enforce track limits and provide a physical deterrent, in the most extreme cases, it's impractical. Where Red Bull's complaints can be supported, though, is in its calls for consistency. The rule makers must also be consistent to themselves, whether it's a few centimetres or an entire car's width. If you're off, you're off. The debate draws parallels to football's VAR grievances, when offside calls are sometimes decided by a toe or a shirt sleeve. Much like motorsport's frustrations, these are understandable as they can be pivotal to who wins and loses. But under the current rules, referees are applying what is required with the technology available. Although what is curious to note is that when goal line technology was introduced in football, no such arguments were voiced when a goal was decided by the width of a sticker on a ball. And this brings the discussion back to the barest of margins that decide the closest of calls on track limits. In the moment, tiny track limit infringements are hard to spot with the naked eye. But if it is the difference between pole position, the right and consistent rule is required. The fact is, track limits will always be a point of debate, just as long as circuit officials remember to paint the thin white lines and put curbs out on track. And while the argument for more natural track limits remains a valiant one, and agreeable when safely applied, it doesn't ignore the fact that track limits are here to stay, just as they've always been.